those cases.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Livingston might see those cases over at CCMC, like either a teacher or a parent notices either some kind of odd, maybe discharge or genital bleeding. I'm talking about like in an infant, and then that child presents for examination, and then they find out that either, it's like diagnostic for inflicted injury or concerns of penetration. And obviously those kids, the younger the child, the higher the risk of abuse, because kids can't talk, and also because other adults don't have eyes on those children. When kids are in school, then you have other adults that are interacting with kids on a regular basis, so they may be more aware, especially like, say, a teacher of a child that they've been dealing with all year, and then all of a sudden there's a drastic behavior change, or I don't want to go home, or I really don't like it when my uncle visits. A teacher would be in tune with that. Kids that nobody else has eyes on, or like infants, yes, we do. I think they see those cases over at CCMC, or maybe that would be referred to us for a medical exam. We get calls for all different kinds of things, and a lot of times also for kids with special needs. And we do the best that we can as interviewers, just trying to gather enough information of what is the best way to communicate with this child. I know I've interviewed a couple kids with cerebral palsy, one child that was almost nonverbal, but cognitively understood. And in my mind, and we talked about this as a team, I was thinking, how am I going to structure the interview so that my questions aren't leading, but so that we can get some information, because there really were concerns that something happened to this child by a caregiver or teacher or something. So I think that we had some kind of method, and it was always like, and even as interviewers, we always give like 3 options, like was it the red house, the green house, or something else. So with this child, I think if I would say something like, so were you in the kitchen, the living room, or somewhere else? If it was the kitchen, like, raise your foot or something, and the child communicated that way by, I would give like, many different choices.
Wouldn't that be a leading question then?
Yeah. Not if we're giving like,
if you're given 3 options, though, that's letting that child know that it happened and which one of those places did it happen. It doesn't give the child an option that it never happened.
I'm saying this is for a child that's already made a disclosure.
But it's still leading.
Not if a child has already made a disclosure that something has happened, but you're trying to figure out where they were when it happened.
What if it never actually happened? It was advised to them that it was happening, and now they're just running with it, and you're just giving them the answers.
Yeah, that wouldn't be, and I'm sorry if that wasn't clear, we wouldn't suggest that unless we had sufficient information up to that point, because we're really, if anything, we go the other way to make sure that we don't ask leading questions. So, a leading question would be like, so-and-so touched you, didn't they? Or like introducing somebody's name into it, but we wouldn't, I'm just thinking of an example off the top of my head, but it was something where this room, that room, or somewhere else. So I don't remember specifically, but I'm saying we had to find a different way to communicate with that child.
So it's more like a fact finding.
Well, that's exactly what a forensic interview is. It's neutral fact finding. Yeah. Although there's moments in a forensic interview where you don't want it to turn into a therapy session, but just being human and obviously feeling bad if a child's having a really hard time emotionally, you want to be there for the child, but you don't want it to turn into a therapy session because it's your one opportunity to get the information. So we do the best that we can, or just encourage the child to talk with their therapist. Sometimes kids, one question actually that a lot of adolescents have is, do you believe me? And we don't really answer that. We might deflect or say, I'm wondering why you're asking that question. Is there somebody that doesn't believe you? Or, the most important thing is that you're making sure I'm getting the information right, because our role is very neutral. So, and sometimes that's hard with what we hear.
Do parents ever have access to the interviews?
Well, we go over the interview when we're done, kind of so when parents, sometimes we have had, on rare occasion, parents want to come in and see the DVD of their interview. I think that's happened a couple times, and we would want to know why they want to see it, kind of what the circumstances were in that particular case or with that particular child. Sometimes parents think they want to see the DVD, and then they change their mind. Just like in the post-interview meeting, I remember one father that was just insistent. He's like, I want to hear all the details. And we're really, we really deliver the information as gentle as possible, kind of in a, real tactful way, because it can be emotionally upsetting. He was very insistent, so I just kind of went over, this is what your child disclosed, and after about 2 minutes, he just became very angry, like slammed the door, and I don't recall if like the alleged perpetrator was the mother's boyfriend. I can't recall the circumstances, but sometimes parents think they want to hear the information, and then they don't. So. Any other questions?
The DVD itself, it's a St. Francis record? I mean, who's
Yeah.
the owner of the record, I guess?
Well, we have the original at the Children's Center, and then law enforcement leaves with a copy of the DVD.
Just a question about supervision. You said you supervise the other interviewers at the center.
Yes.
Do you review their interviews?
Yeah, sometimes I'll do live supervision if I can. If live isn't possible, we might review DVDs. And also the other interviewers, like she'll also observe some of my interviews. I know like at Yale, I think they always try to observe each other's interviews. A lot of times it just depends on, resources and how many interviews we have on that given day. But we also participate in a statewide peer review where we meet with other interviewers around the state of Connecticut and talk about any issues pertaining to our work or about court and we review DVDs to, just to make sure that everybody's, doing things the way that we're supposed to.
Can you clarify, are you in the one-way mirror room where you're observing, but not in the room where the interview is taking place? Is that what you mean?
Like if I'm observing the other person's
Right.
interview, yeah, I'm in the observation room if I'm observing the other interviewer's interview.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you're not in the room with the child?
Unless I'm doing the interview.
Right, oh, okay,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah.
So, but not all of them. You don't get to review all of them.
Oh, not all of them, no, not with the volume that we have.
Okay. And just one other thing. Did you say that when you go over the interview with the parent afterwards, do you always tell them what the disclosure is?
It really depends on the case and the situation, what they want to hear and how they're doing. We want the parent to be able to leave as okay as they can to go to their child. You don't want, because that's going to affect the child. If you have a parent, which is understandable, but like totally overwhelmed and breaking down, and then they're going out to the waiting room, and then the child sees them like that, then they might think, oh, I never should have said anything. So it really depends on the situation.
The experience I've had is that the parents are when they ask the question, they want to know, but they're not told. And the reason they're not told is because the usual response is, well, it's an open investigation because it's law enforcement and DCF, so we can't tell you anything.
Sometimes that does happen because of different factors in the case. I don't know, say if it was a case where a child was coached and the child said during the interview, my mom told me not to tell you anything, or we don't want so-and-so to get in trouble. Because we work collaboratively, we might decide just kind of give basic information. It's not my decision alone because we work as part of a team. It's kind of a team decision. But I would say for most interviews, we do give an overview. And sometimes parents want to know, was there more? And that's when it's really hard because a lot of times the intake information is minimal and we get in the interview room and then a child discloses a lot more. And that's really hard to tell a parent, yes, your child did disclose more than we thought had happened. And then sometimes kids don't disclose at all, so you never know how it's going to go.
Thank you.
Are you running into many cases where the parent is encouraging a disclosure that's not accurate, that never happened?
Sometimes we see that, and that, we kind of had this discussion in the other group, that gets really tricky. I think the cases of real intentional coaching, like, I want you to go tell the lady a lie because I want to get custody of you, that is really, really rare. But what does happen is, say, in a nasty custody battle and one spouse has their own issues with the other spouse, say maybe the little girl goes for a weekend visit and she's not bathed as much and she comes back and her genital area is a little bit red. We've seen like, oh my God, you know what? why is your pee-pee red? Oh, somebody touched you. Did something happen? I know somebody touched you when you went to visit daddy. And then it just kind of snowballs from there. So in those cases, you really have to pick it apart with a fine-tooth comb to really see how did the disclosure arise? Because there's a big difference between a child spontaneously making a disclosure, and with young children, it's very classic that a child will be riding in the back seat of the car and they just blurt out, "Mommy, so-and-so did such and such." Like, that's different from, say, a parent observing something and then really repeatedly questioning the child, not liking the answers they're hearing, and then trying to get a different answer. So you really want to find out what were the circumstances, to whom did the child disclose, what kind of questions were they asked, what was that person's demeanor that responded to their disclosure. So those are really hard to sort out.
So you're aware of that when you're interviewing the children usually, if it's coming from a divorce or if it's just...
We're aware of the circumstances of the disclosure. Yep, that's usually in our intake information. Yeah, just the reason for the referral. On such and such a date, the child disclosed to their therapist, or on Saturday night, mother was giving the child a bath, the child began crying and said, "Don't touch me there because, so-and-so touches me there and I don't like it." Like, whatever the referral information is, we have that at the time of interview. Yeah.
So could you also give a great statistic on the IOL about how we kind of have this mind frame of when a child is being sexually abused, there's always physical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about how we work with the law enforcement for a perpetrator to, if they're looking for that probable cause, and you gave a statistic about like how often children actually come in and there's actual, because you mentioned about how children heal quickly, but you mentioned the amount of cases that come in, how often there's actual physical evidence for all of these 1,500 cases that you see a year.
Yeah.
So how often that is?
Oh, I don't know. I would say not that often, but it does happen. I think more so on the physical abuse side, you might see a report that just says that it's diagnostic for inflicted abuse. Like on the sexual abuse examinations, it might say that there was a penetrating injury, or what I think what's probably the most common is that the exam was normal. This neither proves nor disproves sexual abuse. And really, what they put the most emphasis on is the child's words, like what is the child saying happened or didn't happen to them. But there are some cases where children do test positive for sexually transmitted infections or have like lacerations or tears, like we do see things like that. So.
How often do you find that because of other areas of neglect, that they come up, that they make up a story for attention, or they're trying to get a need met through making up something because there's another area where they're being neglected? Is that something that you ever find?
We have had that. I think it's pretty rare. I think that research shows like less than 4% of allegations are false, because it's not the kind of allegation that someone would want to make up and just all the things that go along with it. Although we have had a couple, a few cases with adolescents that in the end have said that they made it up, or because their friend said something and their friend got a lot of attention. But then you have to think, what else is going on in the house, because an adolescent is old enough to understand the consequences, so why are they saying that? And then you also get into the whole thing about recantation. Is it a false recantation? That's not unusual for a child to make a disclosure and then the domino effect, then things start happening. DCF is in people's lives. All of a sudden a detective is talking with another family member, and then somebody will get a call, the child recanted and said that it never happened. They made the whole thing up because they just wanted attention. But then when you look at the initial statement, it's very detailed in the information that they've given. And I had one case to this day that remains a mystery. I interviewed an adolescent boy, I think because of sexual abuse by his mother. He made a disclosure, recanted. So, yes, my mother sexually abused me. No, she didn't. I made the whole thing up. Then he reaffirmed, no, when I told you I made it up, that wasn't really true. She did abuse me, and then he recanted again. And nothing ever happened with that case because it was hard to sort out. Did something happen? Did something not happen? So that gets really tricky, so.
Yeah, it's so interesting, you know, the whole betrayal piece
Right.
is so big.
Mhm.
It's because it's how they identify, so if you're abused,
Yep,
you identify with, it's like if you challenge that, like it was wrong or it wasn't
Yeah.
love or something, then
mhm,
the abandonment piece or I'm gonna be
Right.
alone
right.
kind of thing, right?
Right, and some, like, part of that dynamic we see in the domestic minor sex trafficking, because a lot of those kids don't see themselves as victims, and they're getting all these, you know, phones and money and gifts and things like that, so those cases are really hard, although some of those kids really do open up, and those cases can be very complicated, those interviews are very long, very complicated, but yeah, I think it really depends on all the dynamics, and I think probably the most important thing is the primary caregiver's response, like, do they believe and support the child? And also, just, is a child ready to talk? I know years ago I had an adolescent, she came in, and she was referred because of concerns of sexual abuse by her dad, and I think her dad was in some sort of law enforcement capacity, so she had made some concerning statements that got her in the door, and we got to the interview room, she's like, I really don't want to be here, I don't want to talk about it, I've forgiven my father, and I kind of just met her where she was at, like I tried to make it as comfortable as possible for her to talk, because sometimes kids are just embarrassed or they think they're going to say something that shocks you, so we want to make kids feel really comfortable. So I just kind of met her where she was at, and I said, you know, if most kids come just one time, but if you feel like, you know, you would like to talk further, you could always come back. And then I heard, I think like 2 or 3 weeks later, there was some sort of argument in the family, and she became angry enough, I think she like walked down to the police station and just gave a full statement or something. So she wasn't ready at the time, and I think there may have been pressure from the mom to recant, but eventually it did come out. So all cases have their own different dynamics. Okay, any other questions before the DVD? So this DVD, so it's called Alone, No Love, and I've seen this, we always show this DVD to our students and our medical residents. I've seen it like over 20 times, and I mean, it's a great DVD. It really explains the whole multidisciplinary team process, how everybody works together and what the roles are of all the people involved in, you know, any of these cases. And this is this one young man's story. He was sexually abused by his father, and it talks about kind of his journey through the Chicago CAC. Of course, we have all the now.
This is as loud as it gets, so.
Like every close to Thanksgiving, Christmas, these windows used to be light up. We had a lot of good memories in this building before he came back into our life and after too. Only thing that I have is the time to be blessed. always had it. I feel like I was alone. Always love over half of everybody. Just like sit down and daydream. And I draw something. It's just sleep. It's just like you said, I started.
Think about seeing this picture, at that time I believe I would ask them what was it's all about. Chicago Tribune.